Some chains don't leave marks on the skin. They're made of signatures, quiet nods, and years of people looking the other way. Out on the edge of a dry valley, where life depends on land and silence, a young woman wasn't being beaten every day. She was being erased slowly, legally, and in plain sight. No screams, no locked doors, just papers she was told to sign, and a life she was told didn't belong to her. The real question isn't who hurt her, it's how many people knew and stayed quiet. If stories like this matter to you, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next. Clara Hayes had grown up on that land long before she understood what it meant to own anything. The valley was dry, wide, and quiet. Wind moved through the dust the same way it always had. Cattle lowed in the distance. Work started before sunrise and ended after dark. From the outside, her life looked ordinary, hard, but honest. What most people didn't see was how little of it actually belonged to her. Silas Boone never needed to raise his hand. He didn't need to shout. He had learned long ago that control worked better when it sounded reasonable. He woke her when he decided the day should start. He told her when to eat, when to rest, when to stop asking questions. And every time Clara pushed back, even just a little, Silas reached for the same words, the law, the contract. I'm your legal guardian. He would lay the papers out on the table, smooth them with his palm, and wait. No threats, no anger, just patience, the kind that wears you down. Those documents followed Clara everywhere, in the house, in the truck, even in her thoughts. She didn't fully understand them, but she understood what they meant. Her name was on the land, but her signature was never enough. Silas always said he could sign for her, said it was easier that way, safer. Sometimes Clara stood in the doorway of the old livestock shed, watching the chain sway from a rusted hook. It wasn't locked around her. It didn't have to be. The weight of it was already there. People think violence always makes noise, shouting, breaking things, bruises you can point to. But this kind of violence was quiet. It arrived every morning and stayed all day. It wore clean clothes. It spoke calmly. And it convinced everyone watching that nothing was wrong. When Clara tried to talk, Silas never argued. He corrected her. When she cried, he didn't mock her. He waited. When she said the land was hers, he reminded her that ownership was complicated. You wouldn't understand, he'd say. Not yet. Little by little, Clara stopped asking what was fair. She started asking what was allowed. That was the most dangerous part. Because when power hides behind rules, it becomes hard to tell where right ends and wrong begins. To the outside world, Silas looked responsible, organized, law-abiding, a man keeping things running the way they should. And Clara, she looked quiet, obedient, unproblematic. No one saw the cost of that quiet. At night, she lay awake, listening to the wind scrape against the metal siding. She counted the hours by the sound of it. Morning would come. It always did. And with it, another day she didn't get to choose. This wasn't a story about fists or blood. It was a story about control that knew how to dress itself up as order. And it leaves a harder question hanging in the air. When power wears the mask of legality, how do you tell who's wrong and who everyone has decided not to question? People in that valley weren't blind. They saw Clara in the yard before sunrise, moving like a shadow between the shed and the trough. They saw her shoulders tighten whenever Silas's boots hit the porch boards. They saw how her eyes dropped to the ground the second he spoke. And they told themselves it wasn't their business. The nearest neighbor rode past the property line twice a week. He slowed down every time, long enough to notice the chain hanging from the hook, long enough to see Clara's hands shake when she carried feed. Then he'd tip his hat, stare straight ahead, and keep riding. A hired hand from the next place over stopped by the supply store one afternoon. He asked for nails, rope, and lamp oil. The clerk leaned in and spoke low. "You heard about that girl out by Boone's place?" The man didn't answer. He just paid and left. The store owner watched him go. He watched the dust settle behind the wagon wheels, and he told himself the same thing everyone told themselves. Silas has papers. He's her guardian. Everything's legal. Those were the words that built the fence higher than any wooden post ever could. Silas understood that better than anyone. He didn't need to threaten the valley. He only needed to remind people what trouble looked like. A court summons, a dispute over boundaries, a fight over water rights, a sheriff who asked questions, a town that picked sides. Most folks in places like that don't fear evil. They fear chaos. So they stayed quiet, and quiet, in the wrong hands, becomes permission. Clara felt that silence like heat on her skin. When she walked into town with Silas beside her, she could feel eyes following her. Not cruel eyes, not hateful ones. Just eyes that knew something was off and chose not to name it. A woman at the dry goods counter tried to be kind once. She reached out like she might touch Clara's arm. Then Silas stepped closer. The woman's hand froze in midair. Her smile tightened. She turned back to folding cloth as if nothing had happened. Clara didn't blame her, not out loud. But something in Clara learned a lesson that day. If grown men wouldn't speak, if women wouldn't reach out, if the whole town could look right at her and keep their mouths shut, then maybe this was normal. Maybe this was just what happened to people like her. That's how a person gets erased, not all at once, piece by piece. Not with shouting, with silence, and the valley had plenty of that. Now listen closely, because this is where most people get it wrong. They think men like Silas are powerful because they're violent. But violence isn't always the fist. Sometimes it's the routine. Sometimes it's the way a man controls the clock, the food, the paperwork, and the story everyone hears. Men like Silas don't grow strong in a single night. They grow strong because 3 things feed them. The first is convenience. It's easier to say, it's family business, than to step in. It's easier to look away than to get involved. The second is fear. Not fear of being hurt. Fear of becoming the next problem. Fear of a lawsuit, a feud, a town turning against you. And the third is habit. The slow, everyday habit of pretending you didn't see what you saw. That habit turns decent people into spectators. And it turns a victim into someone who stops believing she deserves help. That's the quiet loop. Silas controls Clara. The valley avoids Silas. The valley's silence convinces Clara she's alone. And once a person truly believes they're alone, they stop fighting. They stop asking. They stop hoping. That's when the damage goes deeper than bruises ever could. Because the body can heal. But a spirit that's been taught it doesn't matter takes much longer. So here's the real choice this valley made. Not between good and bad. Between speaking up and staying comfortable. Between doing the right thing and avoiding the mess. And I want you to sit with that for a second. Because if you were riding past that land and you saw what they saw, would you have kept going? 2. The valley didn't get louder after that question. It got quieter. The wind kept moving across the dirt like nothing had been said. The sun kept sinking behind the low hills, and Clara kept doing what she'd been trained to do. She stayed small. She stayed careful. She stayed alive. But on a night when the sky held no moon, Something else moved through the darkness. Slow, heavy, unfamiliar. A wagon wheel creaked on the old road, then another. Then the soft thud of hooves pulling weight through sand. Ethan Cole was coming back. He wasn't a sheriff. He wasn't a preacher. He wasn't anyone the town gathered around. He was the kind of man you only noticed when he wasn't there. A drifter with calloused hands, a quiet face, a wide brim hat worn thin at the edges. The sort of man who did his work, took his pay, and didn't ask for trouble. That's what people thought. What they didn't know was that Ethan had seen this valley before Clara ever learned how to stop crying silently. Years ago, Ethan had sat in a back room behind a trading post, staring at a stack of papers that smelled like ink and dust. A middleman had slid them across the table and said, "Good deal. Clean title. Cheap." Ethan had almost signed. Almost. His fingers had hovered over the pen. He could have owned a slice of this valley. He could have built something. He could have started over. Then he noticed the numbers didn't match. A name misspelled. A date that didn't sit right. A signature that looked forced. Ethan didn't call anyone. He didn't raise a fuss. He just pushed the papers back and walked out. He told himself that was enough. He told himself it wasn't his fight. He told himself the valley would sort out its own problems. That's the thing about walking away. It feels clean in the moment. It feels smart. But the mind doesn't forget what the heart recognized. And Ethan carried that small, quiet wrongness with him for years. Like a pebble in his boot. Not enough to stop him from walking. Enough to make every mile uncomfortable. Now he was back. Not because he wanted to be. Because something in him wouldn't let him keep running. The road led him near Boone's property line just as the night air cooled. The cattle were restless. Not loud, just uneasy. Like they could smell trouble before it happened. Ethan tightened the reins and slowed the team. That's when he heard it. A metal scrape. Soft. Dragging. The sound of a chain being pulled over dirt. It wasn't a scream. Wasn't even a cry. It was quieter than that. And somehow, it landed harder. Ethan's hands went still on the leather. His jaw tightened. His eyes lifted toward the dark outline of the sheds and the yard beyond. He could have kept going. He could have told himself he was tired. He could have told himself it was none of his business. He'd done it before. That was the twist no one in that valley would ever guess. The man who was about to do the right thing had a history of not doing it. Ethan sat there, listening. The chain scraped again, and in that sound, he heard his own past. The moment he pushed those papers back. The moment he chose silence over responsibility. His chest rose with a slow breath. Then he let it out like he was letting go of something he'd been carrying too long. The wagon rolled forward a few feet, then stopped. Ethan swung down, boots hitting the ground with a dull thud. He didn't move fast. He didn't move like a hero. He moved like a man who finally understood that doing right today doesn't erase what you avoided yesterday, but it might keep you from avoiding it again. And as he stepped toward the shadow of Boone's land, the night held its breath, because this time, he wasn't passing by. Ethan didn't burst through a door. He didn't ride in with a badge or a gun held high. He walked, slowly, like a man stepping into something he couldn't outrun anymore. The yard was quiet under the dark sky. The sheds stood like tired silhouettes. A single lantern burned near the house, throwing weak light across the dirt, and there, near the livestock shed. Clara froze. The chain was still in her hands, not locked around her, but close enough to make her flinch, like her body had learned the weight of it. Ethan stopped a few yards away. He didn't rush her. He didn't touch her. He just spoke, low enough that the night almost swallowed it. "Are you hurt?" Clara didn't answer right away. Her throat worked like she was trying to remember how to use her voice. She nodded once. Barely. Behind her, the porch boards creaked. Silas Boone stepped into the lantern light like he owned it. Because for years, he had. He looked at Ethan the way a man looks at a stray dog near his feed bins. Not afraid. Just annoyed. "You lost," Silas said. Ethan kept his hands where Silas could see them. "No," Ethan said. "I'm right where I need to be." Silas's mouth tightened. "You know who I am." "I do, and you know what this is." Silas nodded toward Clara, toward the shed, toward the property line. "This is my business. Legal business." That word again. Legal. Silas lifted his chin like it was a shield. "I'm her guardian," he said. "Everything's in order. Papers. Court records. The whole thing." He didn't mention the chain. He didn't mention Clara's shaking hands. He didn't mention the way she stood like someone waiting for permission to breathe. Ethan looked past Silas, at the house, at the table inside where those papers always seemed to appear. Then he looked at Clara. "Do you want to stay here tonight?" he asked. Silas laughed once, sharp, joyless. "She doesn't get to decide," he said. "Not yet." Clara's eyes flicked to Silas, then to the ground. That was the moment Ethan understood something that didn't require proof or paperwork. This wasn't just control. This was erasure. Ethan reached into his coat and pulled out a folded bundle. Not money, not a weapon. Paper. He held it up, then laid it down on a barrel under the lantern light. Silas's gaze followed it like a hungry man watching food. "What's that?" Silas asked. Ethan's voice didn't rise. "It's a copy of the title history," he said, "and the guardianship filings, and some signatures that don't match the ink they're written in." Silas's face didn't change. Not at first. He was too practiced for that. "That's not yours," he said. "You don't have any right." Ethan cut him off with a single sentence. "I almost bought this land once." Silas blinked. Just once. Ethan kept going. "I sat with papers that looked clean until you looked close," he said. "I walked away instead of asking why. I told myself it wasn't my problem." He paused. "And then I left a girl to pay the price for my silence." Clara's eyes lifted, just slightly, like she wasn't sure she heard him right. Silas stepped closer to the barrel. His fingers twitched, wanting to snatch the papers up, to own the story again. But Ethan didn't move. Behind the dust and distance, there were other sounds now. Hooves, footsteps, a wagon slowing on the road. People, neighbors. Not all of them, but enough. A man from the supply store stood at the edge of the yard, hat in hand, looking sick with regret. A hired hand hovered behind him. Someone else, someone who had always ridden past, stood with his jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the ground. Witnesses. The ones who had been quiet. Silas saw them and felt the ground shift under him. He tried to straighten his shoulders. "This is a private matter," he snapped. "Get off my land." No one moved. Because once people are already standing there, the fear loses its grip. Ethan didn't smile. He didn't act proud. He looked tired and honest. "There's a county inspector in town," Ethan said. "He's expecting these papers in the morning." Silas's eyes flashed. "You think you're some kind of savior?" he hissed. Ethan's voice stayed calm. "No," he said. "I'm the man who should have spoken up the first time. That's what made it different." Ethan wasn't there to be thanked. Clara wasn't there to beg. This wasn't a scene where someone gets forgiven in a single breath. Because that's not how wrongs like this disappear. People like to believe making it right is a moment, a confession, a handshake, a clean ending. But real accountability doesn't come with applause. It comes with consequences. It comes with days where no one trusts you, with nights where you don't sleep easy, with work that has to be done over and over, even when nobody is watching. That's the truth about making amends. It isn't a sentence you say. It's a life you choose. Silas stared at the papers like they were a trap, because they were. Not a trap made of tricks, a trap made of truth. Clara took one step forward, just one. Her voice came out rough, but it came out. "I'm not signing anything," she said. Silas turned on her, eyes burning. Clara didn't flinch this time. And in that small shift, one step, one sentence, something in the yard changed. The silence that had protected Silas for years finally broke. Not with a punch, with people standing still and refusing to look away. Silas Boone didn't vanish overnight. The next morning, the valley looked the same. The dust still rose with the wind. The cattle still needed water. The sun still came up like it always did. But something had shifted. A county inspector arrived in town by noon. Then another man with a worn briefcase. Then someone from the records office. Quiet people. Plain clothes. The kind of help that doesn't feel like help at first. They didn't kick down doors. They didn't shout in the yard. They asked for documents, dates, signatures, witness statements. And for the first time in years, Silas couldn't win with his calm voice alone. Clara watched from the kitchen doorway as papers were spread across the table like playing cards. The ink looked ordinary. The words looked clean, but her hand still shook. Because even when the chain is gone, the body remembers what it meant. That first night after everything, Clara didn't sleep. She lay on a thin mattress in the back room of the house, staring at the ceiling boards. The lantern had been blown out, but her eyes stayed open anyway. Every creak sounded like a boot on the porch. Every gust of wind sounded like a door opening. Her heart kept jumping ahead of time, like it was trying to warn her before anything happened. She kept listening for Silas's voice, not because she wanted to hear it, because a part of her didn't believe it could be gone. Morning came slow and pale. Clara stepped outside and immediately looked over her shoulder. Habit. The yard was empty. The shed stood quiet. The chain still hung from the hook, but it wasn't moving. Still. Clara's shoulders stayed tight. Fear doesn't leave the moment danger does. Fear lingers. It sleeps in your muscles. It waits in the back of your throat. It shows up when everything is supposed to be fine. Ethan stayed, not like a man trying to claim the place, not like a hero waiting for gratitude. He stayed like someone who understood that rescue isn't the end of a story. It's the beginning of the hard part. He fixed small things without announcing it. A loose hinge on the shed door, a broken latch on the gate, a leaky bucket handle. Work that didn't require permission. Work that simply made the world feel a little more predictable. Clara watched him from a distance at first. The way you watch a dog you're not sure you can trust. Ethan didn't push. He didn't tell her to be strong. He didn't tell her to move on. He didn't say the words people say when they want your pain to end quickly so they don't have to sit with it. One evening, Clara flinched when a pan hit the floor in the kitchen. The sound was small. The reaction wasn't. Her breath caught. Her hands went cold. Ethan looked up from the porch step and waited. He didn't rush inside. He didn't demand an explanation. He just said, "It's a pan. That's all." Clara stared at him. He nodded once, like he was reminding her of something simple. "Right now is right now," he said. "Not back then." Clara didn't answer, but she held on to that sentence the way you hold on to a railing when your legs feel weak. Later that night, she sat by the stove with a cup of water. She wasn't drinking. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Her mind kept replaying old moments like they were happening again. The way Silas would stand in the doorway. The way his shadow filled a room. The way his voice could change the air. Clara squeezed her eyes shut. When she opened them, Ethan had set something on the table. A simple pocket watch. Worn. Scratched. Still ticking. He didn't make it a speech. He just tapped it lightly. "Count the ticks," he said. "Give your mind something real to hold." Clara listened. Tick. 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 Her breathing slowed without her noticing. In the days that followed, recovery didn't look like a victory. It looked like repetition. Clara stepping into the yard and forcing herself not to look over her shoulder every time. Clara washing her hands and not scrubbing until they hurt. Clara eating a full meal without feeling sick afterward. Small things. Quiet things. But real. Sometimes she would walk to the fence line and stand there, staring at the open land beyond it, not dreaming, not planning, just standing, like she was learning how to exist without permission. Ethan never asked her for thanks. He never asked her to forgive him, because he knew something most people don't. There are wounds that close fast on the skin, and there are wounds that close slowly in the soul. The soul doesn't heal because someone saved you once. It heals because, day after day, you learn you're safe. You learn you have a choice. You learn that the past can shout and still not get to decide what happens next. And Clara wasn't there yet. Not fully. But for the first time, she was walking in that direction. Slowly. Honestly. One breath at a time. Clara never stood in the yard and announced forgiveness. There was no moment where she looked at the past and decided it no longer mattered. Life didn't work that way. Instead, she woke up each morning and did the work in front of her. She checked the water lines before the heat rose. She counted feed. She walked the fence line and fixed what was broken. Not to prove anything, just to keep things standing. She kept her distance from the places that still felt sharp. The corner of the shed where the chain used to scrape the dirt. The doorway where a shadow once blocked the light. She didn't erase those memories. She respected them. That was her boundary. People sometimes came by and spoke softly, like they expected a miracle ending, like they were waiting for Clara to say the right words so everyone could feel better. They waited for her to forgive. Clara didn't, and she didn't explain herself, because forgiveness isn't something you owe to make other people comfortable. It isn't a debt you pay so the story can wrap itself up neatly. For a long time, Clara had been told what she was supposed to do, what she was allowed to feel, when she was ready, when she wasn't. Now, she decided for herself. That was the freedom. Ethan noticed the change in small ways. The way Clara walked through the yard without shrinking. The way she spoke when she needed something fixed. The way she didn't apologize for taking up space. She didn't thank him every day. She didn't look back at him like a savior. Sometimes, she barely spoke at all. And Ethan understood. Because making things right doesn't mean being welcomed back with open arms. Sometimes it means being allowed to stand nearby, quiet, unpraised. Doing what needs to be done without expecting absolution. That's the part people rarely talk about. They talk about forgiveness as if it's the final step, the goal, the clean ending. But real healing doesn't begin with forgiveness. It begins with safety, with choice, with the simple truth that no one gets to decide how fast you move past what broke you. For some people, forgiveness comes later. For others, it never comes. And both are valid. Clara didn't carry hatred with her. She didn't wake up angry every morning. She just refused to pretend that what happened didn't leave a mark. She chose honesty over performance, distance over forced peace. And in that choice, something unexpected happened. She felt lighter, not because she forgave, but because she stopped carrying expectations that weren't hers. The land didn't demand forgiveness to keep growing. The cattle didn't ask her to smile before they ate. The sun didn't wait for closure before it rose. Life continued, and Clara continued with it, on her terms. That's the quiet truth most stories skip over. Forgiveness can be powerful, but it is never mandatory. And when it's not forced, when it's not demanded or rushed, people finally get the one thing they were denied for so long: the right to decide what healing looks like for themselves. Clara stood at the edge of the yard one evening, watching the sky change color. She didn't look back. She didn't need to, because freedom, she had learned, doesn't come from forgiving the past. It comes from no longer letting it decide your future. If there is one thing this story leaves behind, it isn't anger. It's a question. Because Clara's life didn't change the day someone finally stepped in. It changed the day the silence broke. And that silence didn't belong to just one man. It belonged to neighbors who looked away, to workers who noticed, then said nothing, to people who told themselves it wasn't their place. None of them thought of themselves as cruel. They just didn't want trouble. That's how it usually happens. Most harm doesn't survive because everyone agrees with it. It survives because enough people decide it's easier not to see. So this ending isn't about heroes. It's about responsibility. If you ever hear something that doesn't sit right, a voice that sounds smaller than it should, a situation that feels controlled instead of cared for, you don't have to rush in swinging. You don't have to put yourself in danger. You don't have to be brave in ways that break you. Sometimes, doing the right thing looks quiet. It looks like asking a careful question, like documenting what you see, like speaking to the right people through the right channels, like refusing to let silence be the final answer, because silence is never neutral. It always picks a side, and breaking it doesn't require shouting. It requires standing where you are and choosing not to look away. Maybe you've been the one who stayed quiet before. Maybe you told yourself it wasn't your story. That doesn't make you a villain, but it does mean you still have a choice. Ethan didn't change the past by coming back. He changed the future by not walking away again. And Clara didn't need a savior. She needed a world that finally stopped pretending nothing was wrong. So, if this story made you uncomfortable, that's not a bad thing. Discomfort is often the moment right before clarity. Ask yourself this: if you heard a cry like that, not loud, not obvious, but persistent, would you recognize it? And if you did, what would you do if this story stayed with you? Take a moment to let others hear it too. Like the video if it resonated. Share it if you think someone else needs this reminder. And subscribe if you want to keep exploring stories that sit with the hard truths instead of looking away. Because sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply refuse to stay silent.